Hi and welcome to episode 191 of Page One, the Writers Podcast. I'm Marco, and as you'll see, I'm flying solo today for this intro, but don't worry, my co-host Tarek is in the main interview, which today is with a brilliant agent, which I'll get to in a moment. But if this is your first episode, please do take the time to go and look at our back catalogue. We've got an amazing list of authors, journalists, comic writers, video game writers, screenwriters, and agents, editors, etc. there. So please do check that out. This is one of our special industry episodes, which is a full video interview with our guest, who this week is another brilliant literary agent in the form of Julie Crisp. Julie worked as an editorial assistant to begin with, then moving on to an editor with some of the biggest names in genre fiction. She's worked with China Miéville, she's worked on the Dune books, she's worked with Naomi Novik, and we talked to her about that experience on the editorial side, and first of all, what skills that's given her as an agent, and also chat about why she wanted to move into the world of agenting as well. We also have a chat about the growing appeal of genre fiction, because I think she says that when she first started out, especially things like sci-fi and stuff were viewed as, and fantasy I suppose, were viewed as not the most important part of the publishing industry, I guess, but it is now making loads of money and of course is attracting a lot more attention. So we also chat to her about, you know, what she personally looks for in queries and the do's and don'ts of that process, which can be great advice for those of you out there that are looking for an agent. So we'll get straight into it. We will be back next week with another special industry episode with not one, but two very special agents, slightly different from the agents we've been speaking to before. We'll be speaking to agents that deal with a heritage list. So that is the estates of authors and how that is still a very important thing that authors working now should start to consider about what they should do about their rights going forward. But that's for next week. Now we'll get straight into the interview with Julie. Thanks very much for joining us today, Julie. And when we have writers on the podcast, my first question to them is always, did you always want to be a writer? But did you always want to work in the world of books more generally?
I did. I mean, I didn't know what I wanted to do in the world of books because, to be honest, publishing wasn't exactly something that was particularly well advertised, I suppose, from when I was a child. Mm-hmm. And the area I grew up in wasn't a middle-class environment, let's put it that way. So, I mean, it just wasn't the sort of thing that you would find in the area where I was. But I always loved books. Books for me were like a massive escapism. So my local library was very much just, you know, a place I would go every single week without fail. 7 books taken out every weekend, changed back over every weekend. And that was pretty much a staple diet for me into my teens. And then, yeah, I went to university and studied English. I was basically the first person in my entire family line who had ever been to university. And it was then that I sort of started to source out what I could do that involved working with books, and publishing was just obviously the naturally dream job for me.
So from that sort of process, I mean, how did you actually get into publishing the first time? Was it an advertised job, or did you just inquire at publishers?
It was an advertised job. So when I moved to London initially, I was working as a journalist for a sort of an online magazine for home working, which was this, like, you know, 20 years ago. So it was quite advanced, I think, in its thinking. And then a job came up actually at Hodder and Stoughton to work with Sue Fletcher, who was there at the time, as an editorial assistant. And I went for an interview with her, and we got talking about Stephen King, who was one of my favorite authors, who she happened to be, you know, sort of she worked with, and he'd just been over recently. I think it was his first trip ever to the UK for goodness knows how long. And I was raving about him. She had actually, unfortunately, already filled the position for her editorial assistant. but knew of another editor who was actively looking for an editorial assistant. So I went for an interview with her a few weeks later. And one of the first things I saw was her copies of Dune on the bookshelves, and sort of burst into, sort of a hugely excited monologue about Dune, and that was it. I pretty much got the job on the spot. she was a massive geek as well. So it just worked really well. So I think it was very much personality driven at the time, and just what, sort of our mutual interests happened to coincide.
And what was that job like? What was the day-to-day of that job at that time?
So that was as an editorial assistant, and I was there for, I want to say, 5-6 years. And so my role from then, I was working for 3 different editors, 2 nonfiction, or 1 nonfiction, 1 literary, and then my main editor, who was very much genre. And that was everything from liaising with authors. I started commissioning my own books while I was there eventually as well, sort of taking on my own projects. Some of the more exciting projects I suppose I worked on were authors like the Brian Herbert and Brian Herbert and Kevin J. Anderson, and their House Harkonnen, and the sort of the Prelude to Dune series that they had started writing. Ben Bova, who was like my dad was a massive fan of, so he was hugely excited. But yeah, it was very nitty gritty. So it was as well I want to say at a time period when everything was done on paper. So when you were going through and marking up a script, you had to know all the proofreading, typography, because that's what you were you were using those symbols all the time on sort of scripts to go through them. So it was a very hands-on job, but it was great because in terms of learning how to edit and what you were looking for in a book, I think that was sort of something of an organic process, just building on obviously reading thousands of books and being a huge fan, as to knowing what the kind of story arc should be, what should the characters be doing, and learning how to convey that to an author in an appropriate manner.
And so, I mean, is that as an editorial assistant, are you essentially just helping the editor do what the editor does anyway, in a way, but sort of maybe looking through stuff and then passing stuff on to the editor when necessary?
Yeah. So it's very hands-on. So I mean, I was doing editing as well with that editor, and checking proofs, checking copy editing, so sort of going through the scripts and really, I suppose, the nitty-gritty of things, which I don't think a lot of editorial assistants now don't do, because we have they have editorial departments, which sort of production departments, which take that basis on. But yeah, when we were doing that, and then the editor was sort of mentoring me, I suppose, as we went along as well, and sort of showing me how things worked and giving me more responsibilities as I went on. And then when I moved over to Australia, it was a whole different ball game again, because that was very much working in conjunction with the production department to say, okay, well, I want this kind of typesetting for it. So it was a much different role again, and it just sort of broadened, I suppose, the knowledge skills base that I'd already sort of picked up in London. And
am I right in looking at your kind of editorial roles before you moved into the agency side of things, you've worked a kind of broad church in the editorial world? I know you went to Australia for a few years, worked kids' books, non-fiction stuff. You did crime at Pan Macmillan, and then obviously Tor, you were there for I think 7 years or so doing genre books. I mean, that seems like a massive amount of experience you must have gained in all these areas. Was it what part did you enjoy the most of all that?
I really enjoyed the fiction publishing the most, purely because that's what I tend to read as a fan and for pleasure. Crime fiction I particularly loved when I was working with Maria Raitt at Macmillan. She was fabulous. I got to work predominantly, I was working with Ann Cleeves for sort of 5 or 6 years on her books, the Shetland series and the Vera Stanhope books. And she's a fabulous author. But then when the opportunity came up, then when Peter Lavery left Tor, retired, and they sort of said, you know, is this something that you would be interested in? Of course, you know, I'd been brought up on a steady diet of science fiction and fantasy and Dragonlance Chronicle books, you know, since I was a kid. So I was just like, no, sure, yeah, I can do that. Yeah, I mean, and that was fabulous. So working with authors like Peter F. Hamilton and China Miéville, yeah, I mean, it was just a bit of a dream come true. For 9 years, I had great fun there.
So, what led you to then take that step to the side, I suppose, into the agenting world instead?
Yeah, I mean, part of it was, you know, I'm being absolutely perfectly honest, I got made redundant. So they decided that I think it was a time when science fiction and fantasy still wasn't taken quite as seriously as your mainstream books.
Yeah.
And despite it doing very well, they felt it potentially wasn't doing quite well enough for them. So they just decided to downsize, which, you know, obviously in retrospect, it's huge. And they are doing very, very well with it. So for me, it was something I'd been considering doing for a long time anyway. While I love publishing, it is quite a difficult business in terms of the politics, the fact that there's not a huge amount of autonomy as an editor. So anything that you do take on has to go through lots of different stages before you would actually be able to permitted to buy it. And I think the thing that I found particularly difficult at that time as well was there wasn't a sales department and a publicity department and a marketing department at the time who really understood what science fiction and fantasy was. So it was kind of relegated to that kind of geek, you know, niche. And I think they could see that there was potential. They just didn't know quite how to reach it. So if it wasn't something that would reach the mainstream, they didn't feel like, you know, it was going to create, you know, as many sales maybe as was needed. And I think for me as an editor, I think you do get a little bit frustrated with, you know, seeing these great projects come through and just not being able to do anything with them because if it doesn't pigeonhole or tick a certain amount of boxes, then it's not going to get through the acquisitions meeting. And I think, you know, don't get me wrong, because I do think things have changed a lot, but it's taken, you know, 9 years or so to actually reach a stage now where it's taken very, very seriously indeed.
So did you see quite a few books come through that you were really kind of excited about and thought this would be perfect? You could kind of see where it would sit the shelf, etc., but then you meet that resistance when it comes to the kind of money needing to be spent to actually buy it.
Yeah, and sometimes it wasn't even the money, because I mean, it wasn't like there were huge advances going out either. It was just, is it this meets that? And of course, with the genre in particular, it's like, well, doesn't always fit conveniently in that little slot. So, yeah, it's tricky. Well, I do remember having quite a few very engaged conversations in the acquisitions meetings with just, you know, have you read it? Have you read it this area? And getting very frustrated. But as I said, I know it's improved. I know there are lots of big fans in the sales teams and stuff now for this particular area. So I feel like things have moved on.
I suppose it's something where the more kind of genre books that are released, the easier it is to comp stuff, because you've got the more unusual books are out there, the more stuff you have to compare it to. So it becomes less weird or tricky and easier for the marketing team to say, okay, we know where we place this now because another book kind of paved the way a little bit, and that kind of, does that make things easier as time's gone on?
It does to a certain extent, yeah. But as I said, I think it also helps that you've got a lot of people actually working in the industry now who read this for enjoyment, so are actively aware of the genre as a whole. And if they've got experience in it and they've got comparable authors that they've read themselves, then they can contribute to the conversation. And I think a lot of the time what was happening was there wasn't necessarily a natural reader. And so to a certain extent, you're having to rely on the editor's choices for that. And while most of the time it works, sometimes it doesn't. And then there's a lot of responsibility on individual shoulders for sort of, you know, taking that hit.
Yeah, and as I suppose actually as time goes on, as you say, it is definitely a growing part of the industry. Fantasy sci-fi books are doing much better than they have done. As people move into the world, they will be more familiar with that sort of stuff. So you would hope that certainly going forward that there will be more openness, I suppose, even more openness than there is now to those types of stories.
Oh, I think the industry is massively receptive now because they've seen actually how much money it makes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I think the wonderful thing about genre as well is it's not here today, gone tomorrow kind of industry either. So you've still got authors like Robin Hobb and Raymond D. Feist, who backlist continuously because they're considered to be sort of, the backbone of the the area that we're reading in, and therefore newcomers coming in, yes, they are picking up, sort of all the new and modern authors out there, but they are also going back to, I don't even call them classics because that's just, sort of almost, I don't know.
Yeah,
but they feel like,
yeah.
the sort of the classic openers to this world that we exist in. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you did make that step into agenting, and I suppose your significant experience in the editorial world, perhaps did that start you on a good footing, perhaps more than someone that's just coming into agenting cold?
I think it did because I'd already got a reputation, I suppose, with editors in genre. They knew what I'd done. They knew my past experience. A lot of us were friends. We were all in contact. We were going to the same conventions and stuff. So I think that definitely helped. Mm-hmm. And then in terms of the editorial experience, yeah, I am an agent who edits. So when I get a manuscript that comes in on submission, and if I take that author on, that author's going to go through maybe two big edits with me before they will actually get submitted. Mm-hmm. And so again, I think editors are aware that anything that I send through to them is of quite a polished standard.
And for people out there that are wanting to break into the industry, into, I suppose, either the publishing side of things or the agency side, or both, I suppose, as your case was, is the route you took, a good example? Would you say that it's good to get experience of both sides of the industry, or is it there's no perfect path, just jump in wherever you find interesting and find your footing once you're in?
I don't think there is a perfect path, and I will say I think it's harder and harder every year to try and get into publishing in anything, mm-hmm. Whether it's agenting or editorial. I thought it was tough 20 years ago, but I look at what people are having to go through now, and creative writing degrees and also publishing degrees that they're going in with. And it's a lot of competition for, let's be perfectly honest, not a lot of money. So, I mean, it is something that you have to be really certain about, that you want to choose this as and it's not just a career either. It does very much feel like a lifestyle choice mm-hmm. a lot of the time.
Yeah, because I was going to ask, that leads neatly onto the question. As an agent, we hear all the stories, we read them. How many queries are you having to deal with when your queries are open per week?
Per week? So I kind of measured it by month. So I opened for a 3-month period middle of last year and had just over 900 manuscripts within 3 months.
Yeah.
And I've got about 50 I'm still working my way through before I open up again. Of those 900, I've taken on one client.
Yeah.
Wow. And what's your process then? What, when you look at your inbox and you see these 900 emails with submissions, how do you go about looking at them, and what do you?
I open a bottle of wine first, because just to get over that initial hump of good Lord. It's very much. I go through. I read the pitch letter first, and I've been very transparent about this on Twitter as well, because I know people are curious about it. So I go through. I read the pitch letter first, or the query letter first. If the query letter is just an immediate, no, this is not my area, this is not something I'm particularly interested in, this isn't the ticking the boxes for me, then it's an automatic sort of turn down, thank you very much for submitting, but this isn't quite right for me. If the ones that I think, oh, okay, there's something more to this, I definitely want to read more, I kind of allocate those to another folder. And then once I've gone back through, I'll go back through those and I will read over sort of the first couple of chapters, see whether the writing engages me, see whether something grabs me. Obviously, if it doesn't, then it gets rejected. If those first 3 chapters grab me, that goes into another folder. And then then I'll request the entire script, which is what happened with my most recent client I took on.
And so this is a very difficult question, probably, but I mean, is there a sort of percentage level that you think, just on the basis of the letter, you're like, you can easily say, it might be good, but it's just not for me, kind of a thing, and that you can sort of sweep to the side?
I'd say probably 50% of what I get in is based on the query letters at the moment, in terms of, is this one for me? Is this something I think I can sell? Is it something that I think the marketplace is looking for? So I kind of have a little, I suppose, a mental tick box in my head. And if it doesn't automatically hit all the tick boxes, then it has to go. And I'm very aware that I am probably passing up on some absolutely magnificent scripts.
Yeah.
But when you've got 900 to go through and only a limited amount of time, because again, it's not something I tend to do during the day, kind of my evening role. And I think I kind of worked it out as if I read every single 903 chapters, it would take me like 1.5 years, nearly 2 years to actually get through them in the time, doing like maybe 3 or 4 an evening, 5 an evening, so it's a lot of work.
That's nuts.
But on the other hand, I am also very aware that on the end of every single one of those submissions is an author who has put their heart and soul into a manuscript. So it's a really tough business, Yeah,
it definitely is, and from the author side of things, it can be, you'll see it online, the people that are get frustrated at the length of time, or the no response. Some people give no response, some people give a very form response or whatever. But when we speak to agents, then you kind of understand, with the numbers that they're dealing with, it's a difficult process. But I mean, I wanted to ask if there are certain, so there's the stories that are not for you, they're just not your genre. They may be good, maybe bad, whatever. But are there certain errors that you see in queries, whether it's the query letter or the pages themselves, that you think people should watch out for if they are submitting?
Yeah, there's a few red flags. I'm not sure whether I should go into them though. Quite contentious.
Absolutely.
So one of the ones that kind of gets me a little bit, and I know it'll be a typo, but is if I'm approached as a different agent. So, somebody has basically just sent out a form letter and just hasn't remembered to actually change the agent's name at the top.
Yeah.
Now, don't get me wrong, that's not an automatic kind of file 13. I would still read through the query, but at the back of my mind is like, could you just get the name right? The gender might be nice.
Dear sir, madam.
Yeah.
So there's that. I think some people can almost try too hard in a query letter to be kind of funny and original. I don't know, maybe that works for some agents, but for me, I just kind of want a professional, this is what the story is about, this is the pitch. And because I don't necessarily need to get a sense of the personality behind the book, the most important thing is the book itself at that stage.
Yeah.
Personality, I would, hopefully connect with if I then, took the book further and decided to talk to the author themselves.
Yeah.
And how important to you are the comparison titles that an author puts down? Because I know that's something which people struggle with sometimes, working out, does it have to be a book? Can it be a TV show? Can it be a film? And what if it is difficult to find a comparison or a recent comparison? Is that something which you are wary of, or do you think that's more your job to kind of work out that when you're putting it forward?
No, I definitely think that's the author's job. I mean, I do think having comparisons are good, and you know, personally, I don't care whether they're books, media, games, TV series, you know, graphic cartoon characters, manga characters. I don't mind what the comparison is, as long as when that comparison comes up, I think the author has got a sense of the marketplace and where they feel that the book should be placed. But it also gives me an image in my own head as to, okay, I can encapsulate that in this particular area, and this is kind of what they're aiming for. Because if I think it's left up to the agent, you know, we can do a lot with that. I mean, we could be completely, you know, misfiring in the wrong direction, and then you get sort of that, you know, this mismatch between what the agent's expectations are and what the author is actually trying to achieve.
Yeah.
And when people are writing their books, and you know, you touched on it there, being aware of the marketplace, how important is that for you as an agent? Because obviously you don't want people, we often hear, don't chase trends, partly because by the time you've chased that trend, it'll already be in the past. Gone. Yeah. But at the same time, if you're wanting an agent, you're wanting to approach a publisher, it's a commercial transaction that you're looking to enter into. So presumably some awareness of the market or marketplace is important there.
I think some awareness is, I think an understanding of what you're writing and where you expect it to be placed is important. Because as I said, otherwise, you know, you could have someone who is writing this fabulous, what the agent thinks is an epic fantasy, and then like, no, this is a literary masterpiece. This is, you know, sort of Booker winner. And don't get me wrong, I've had that one. So it happens. So I think there just has to be an understanding of what the author is trying to achieve, and hopefully, as I said, you know, if they're aiming for the right agent as well with that manuscript.
And once you've then kind of signed someone, and you've, you know, that 900 to 1 royal battle royale has ended, what do you do next? What's your next step with that person? You know, is it a case of, are you quite hands-on editorial? I'm assuming you are, based on your experience.
I'm very hands-on. Maybe a little bit more than my authors appreciate. I don't know. No, I'm known as an agent who edits just because actually that's my background. It's something I enjoy doing, and I feel like I would be letting them down if I didn't get it to as polished a state as possible for submission. And I'll be honest, you know, submissions are difficult. Especially at the moment. I mean, I know authors complain about being ghosted, but trust me, it happens to agents as well, a lot. You know, editors get a lot of submissions, so we don't always get responses from them. It's you know, it's just a very busy industry.
Yeah.
So yeah, I do. So as I said, taking on my most recent client as an example, she's now had a full edit, marked up manuscript, some editorial notes, and an editorial. I'm actually speaking to her tomorrow to sort of go over those and have a discussion about, we sort of bounce ideas around, you know, can this be fixed in this way? What about doing it this way? So it's a very collaborative approach. I'm not dictatorial in any way, shape or form, because the author and I will have had a conversation before I even sign them, which, you know, I'm sure most agents do, to get a sense of whether we're on the shared page as to what we want to achieve with the book and where we think it's going to sit.
Yeah, absolutely.
Again, if you have that kind of disparity of where you think it's going to sell, then you're probably not the right partnership. And
you know, given that you are so hands-on editorially, and that, you know, it's almost a given that whoever you sign will be going through these editorial passes before it's out for submission. When you're reading those pages that are submitted to you, how, you know, every author wants it to be as polished as possible when they're sending it to an agent, but do you take stuff on that you can see the promise in, even if you think it does need polished, it does need reworked in some way?
Oh yeah, without a doubt. Yeah. And it's not to say, I mean, having something well written is key, because you can't write it for an author, you know, that has to be. But in terms of plot structure, if we think there's some character development which isn't quite as good, if we think there's some holes in is sort of the pacing, you know, all of that is fixable. And again, that's something I would have an initial conversation with the author before I even considered representing them, just to make sure that I felt they were both happy with the things that I thought would need fixing and were actually capable of doing it as well.
Yeah.
And then once you've worked on the book with the author and you feel it's ready to go, what's your process there? You know, how do you select the right publisher to go to? How do you cultivate those relationships? What's your step in that part of the journey?
So I have pre-existing relationships with a lot of editors at the big sort of genre houses anyway. I try to make connections with anybody new who is coming in. I have meetings with them. We go to London Book Fair obviously once a year, and I will try and catch up with everyone there, find out what they're looking for. Yeah. So I tend to have a reasonable sense of what particular editors are looking for in this area, in genre in particular. And then the author and I will send them a list of people who I'm planning on sending it out to if they've got any other ideas. You know, there's a particular author and imprint that they would really, really like it to go to. We can have that discussion. And then I will look at putting a submission package together, which again, I will double check with the author. And then we go out on submission, and yeah, fingers crossed then from everyone.
Nice. And presumably that is, you know, you said earlier that, you know, the actual reading of the queries isn't, if you like, the day part of the job. That's what you do in the evening. Putting together submission packages and speaking to your authors and stuff, presumably that's part of what you're doing during the day. But what are the other things that you're doing as an agent on the day-to-day basis?
So it's maintaining communication between editors and signed clients. It's going through contracts. It's making connections with people like audio publishers who we're starting to get a lot more sort of traction with, in terms of, you know, holding back the rights maybe sometimes from traditional publishers and selling directly to audio publishers. So there's a huge variety of different tasks. I mean, just going through my inbox alone, you know, just sort of keeping up, you know, I'll have 5 or 6 different email strands going on between editors and authors where I'm sort of CC'd. Sometimes I will need to step in. Sometimes I can kind of let them get on with it. But yeah, I do like to compare agents, and I'm sure we all feel the same way, as like piggy in the middle.
Yeah.
It's constantly trying to make sure everybody's happy and everything's working. And yeah, I mean, I love it. So as a job, I absolutely adore it. But yeah, it's not for the faint-hearted.
In that sense as well, are you, you know, as an author's agent, once they've signed for you and stuff, are you there as well to, if they're not happy with something, if they're not happy with the suggestion from the publishing editor, or they're not happy with the book cover or something like that, do they come to you first as a port of call for either just to sound off or for you to then approach the publisher?
Yeah, I mean, I'm always there for them to have a conversation with anyway, completely separately from the editor, because that's what I'm there for. Sometimes their relationship with their editor is strong enough that they'll be perfectly happy to have that sort of conversation with them. And again, I'm usually CC'd in on it, so I can step in and say, actually, I totally agree. I just don't think this cover's working at all. How about we do this, this, and that? So yeah, it very much dependent on the relationship between the author and the editor. But yes, a lot of the time I'm stepping in and sort of saying, okay, well, look, this isn't quite working for the author. Can we look at doing it this way instead? And the editors are, you know, the editors want to keep the authors happy and make sure it's a continual working relationship as well. So I don't think I'm just trying to think if there's any examples, but I don't think there's been an example where an editor has just basically dug their heels in and gone, no, they're just going to have to live with it. You know, I mean, it's not going to be good for anyone.
No,
so.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I wanted to ask about the freelance editing service that you offer on your website, which is something quite unusual, and I've not seen. In fact, I'm not sure I've seen any other agents offering this. And obviously, you're bringing your experience from your previous role to here, and I wanted to ask just how that works. Is that something which you offer to any writer out there, and has it ever led to you finding clients through
Oh,
this
no,
way?
no. That's I keep the two very, very separate. So it's very clear on my website as well. If they approach me as an editor, I will not consider them on submission.
Oh, right. Okay. That's interesting.
Because
that's quite a nice kind of clean line then.
it's a very clean and very defined line.
Okay.
Because so to be fair, just, utmost transparency, I haven't done any freelance editing on direct clients for a long time. A lot of the freelance editing I do tends to be for some of the publishing companies.
Right.
Okay.
Or the audio only publishers. So, but I have done it before, and I've always made it perfectly clear to those authors that if I'm working with you as an editor, I will not work with you as an agent.
Why is that then? What happened if you read a book and you were like, oh my God, I have to have this?
Well, then I would discuss with the author, but I wouldn't be charging them a fee for the editorial services.
Oh, I see. Okay,
Yeah,
so it's kind of like, right, I get
it's
that.
because it's a financial transaction.
Yeah,
And I think if you blur those boundaries between an agent editing a manuscript for a fee and then saying, oh, I'll take this on.
Yeah, almost someone's
really
paying to get an
bit,
agent almost. It's a bit, money's going the wrong way, isn't it? Yeah.
Exactly. It's authors, and I've always made this perfectly clear, authors should not be charged for an agent to read their work on submission. If they are signed up with that agent, they shouldn't be charged a fee for being edited by that agent. And they shouldn't be charged fees by publishing companies either. So no, I have made that very, very clear that I have two hats. I'm kind of like, very, very defined though. Yeah. If I do one, I'm not doing the other.
Yeah, no, that makes
fair enough.
a lot
That
of
makes sense. Yeah.
And I suppose to wrap it up, out there, you've alluded to this in what we've been discussing, but it seems to be getting busier and busier and harder for agents to land books with editors, but also for authors to find agents and stuff like that. So given the current environment that there is, what advice would you give to people that are currently looking for an agent?
I think make sure your submission package really is as tight as possible. And I'm talking a query letter more than anything else. Really be very happy with how that is coming across. And, I can give you a breakdown of sort of my ideal kind of pitch letter is like a couple of lines of introduction of what the book is actually about with your comparison titles in there. 2, maybe 3 paragraphs of what I call pitch copy, which is basically like the paperback copy of a paperback book. So it's not a plot by plot breakdown. It's a little bit more sort of commercially savvy.
Yeah.
And a paragraph and a half of a bio.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
So it's very, very straightforward. It's succinct. It's sharp. It's keeping it simple.
One of the styles that you do see, and I think it is much more an American approach, is, they would write Dear Julie or whatever, and then they would say, Anna Smith is a broken child, blah, 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 and then go straight into the pitch like that. Do you like pitches like that?
I don't have an issue with that, as long as the rest of the query letter is also informative. So I get my pitch straight up front. That's great, but then I also want my comparisons and my bio at the bottom as well. So I don't really mind. I don't have a set like it has to be defined in this way.
Yeah,
I'm just saying, as long as that information is contained in there somewhere, then that's useful.
Great. Well, those were the main questions that we had for you, but we always quickly like to end the podcast with the same questions for our guests. The first of which is, what was the last book that you read that isn't one of your clients?
Oh no! Oh my goodness. Okay, so it was Babel.
Oh, excellent! Yeah,
which I loved, absolutely adored. So yes, I had to think about that because I was like, oh, when was it? It was a few weeks ago.
What about the last film that you watched?
God, does it count with the kids?
You
'Cause I
can
think
do
I've
it
just
if you
watched
want.
something
Can,
earlier
yeah,
today,
I'm happy to
which
take
probably
that,
didn't. Oh, what was the last film I watched?
June 2?
No, but I'm desperate to see it.
Okay.
I'm desperate to see it. I did watch the Aquaman 2, which
Oh, is that any good? I haven't seen that one yet.
it was fun. It was fun. It's funny because I tend to watch, I suppose, more sort of TV series at the moment. So
Okay.
Shogun, I just finished
Oh,
watching.
brilliant.
I just absolutely adored.
I have 2 episodes left, so don't spoil it. But yeah,
Yeah,
no.
sorry. And The Brother's Son as well, which I watched and now gutted because apparently they've cancelled it.
Yeah, that's right. They can't, that's the Michelle Yeoh one, isn't
Yeah.
it? Which is can't.
Like,
Yeah.
what are you doing? Anything with that woman in surely has to be gold.
I know. I just finished watching season 1 of Fallout.
I've just started watching that as well.
Terrific, yeah, absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, I do like that. It reminded me very much of a book I read as a child, which is called Children of the Dust. Only Children of the Dust wasn't nearly quite so comedic.
Yeah.
But it had that kind of sound, same kind of impact of
Nice. I've not
fear
heard
and
that.
dread.
Okay.
Excellent. Yeah. Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode. If you did, please leave a comment down below, hit that thumbs up button, and be sure to hit that subscribe button as well so you never miss an episode like these ones below.
And if you want to get in touch, you can always drop us a tweet in the Twitter machine, which is at UK Page 1, as evidenced here, and our other social media channels are available.
Otherwise, we hope to see you next episode.
See you later.